Maseches Sukkah Daf Yud Aleph contains one Mishnah. It begins with another version of the Gemara which we've seen earlier about what type of canopy counts as a blockage between you and the schach. It will discuss and introduce three levels of that canopy, how secure it is and when it's a problem. The Mishnah, we will then begin the Mishnah, which gets us into the halachos of what is kosher schach, what is not kosher schach, gives us an example and a rule. The Gemara will discuss the concept of tasav loy mina asoy, have a machlokes amarim as to what tasav v'loy mina asoy is. The Gemara will then establish one of the opinions. The Gemara will prove one of the opinions, and then the Gemara will go into the source for the halachos as to what schach needs to be in order to be kosher schach. First of all, we're discussing somebody who has something that he's sleeping under, a canopy of some sort. So we had discussed various types of canopies, and the main concern that we've seen here is that if the canopy counts as an ohel, if it's halachically counts as a tent, as a structure of some sort, even a temporary structure, then it's a problem. And we've seen that there's two issues. First of all, how is the canopy spread? Is it a type of shape that is considered to be an ohel? That is does it have a tefach, a flat roof? Is it high enough above the person who's sleeping to be considered an ohel? If it's right over him, it's not considered an ohel. And the other thing is it built permanently? Is it a permanent structured? Is it a permanently constructed structure that counts as an ohel? But the general rule is if it's an ohel, it's going to be an issue. So the Gemara now says another version of this of the Gemara that we've seen earlier. The Gemara quotes of Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, who says that we're discussing a canopy that's made of cloth spread over 4 posts, a canopy that's spread over 2 posts, and a canopy that's spread over 4 posts, but 4 very secure, sturdy posts, which is very permanent. So Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel says that if the canopy is spread over only 2 posts, so that is mutter, because that's not an ohel, because there's no roof. It doesn't have a flat part that's a tefach wide. It slopes straight down. Now, the Gemara says, I have a kash on that, because in our Mishnah we had seen that if someone sleeps under a canopy of this type, he's not yetze. It is an ohel, and he's not yetze. He's considered to be under the canopy, not under the schach. The Gemara says that's different. That's talking about where it slopes, but there is a tefach of flat space, and then it slopes from there. Says, okay, I'll go to our very Mishnah, the one that was quoted previously in the Daf, and that it talks about a canopy that's on 2 posts, again, as well as a canopy that's on 4 posts. And it says as follows. It says, if it's got 4 posts, then it's puzzle. It's no good under any circumstances. If it has 2 posts, then it's good as long as it is 10, as there isn't a 10 at tefach space. A 10 at tefach space would make it a canopy. If it's less than 10 at tefachim, then it's okay. So Gemara says, so I don't understand. According to you, you did not give any differentiation. You said in all circumstances, if it's a 2-poster, so there's no roof, there's no roofs that's a tefach wide, that's okay. But here this Mishnah says it depends how high it is. So Gemara says that's talking about a different type of 2-poster. That's talking about a 2-poster that's very securely built. That's very strong. Since it's very securely built and strong, even though it doesn't have a roof, if it has 10 tefachim height, then it is going to be a problem. If it's less than 10 tefachim, then it's okay. So Gemara says, I don't understand you. If it's securely built, then it's the same as the 4-poster. The whole idea of the 4-poster is that it's an ohel, whether it is 10 tefachim high or not 10 tefachim high. If this thing is so securely built, we had seen earlier that the 4-poster counts as something which is built securely. So this also, once it's built securely, it shouldn't make a difference if it's 10 tefachim high or if it's not 10 tefachim high. Gemara says, no, it's a middle level of securely. It's secure enough that it's a problem if it's 10 tefachim height. It's not secure enough for it to be a problem if it is not 10 tefachim of height. So now the Gemara points out that this all does not go like Rabba by Rav Huna. Rabba by Rav Huna said you're allowed to sleep under any canopy of any sort. He holds that they're all temporary. They're all considered temporary. They're not something which you will stay there. And a temporary structure within a more permanent structure, such as any canopy which is under the schach, is not a problem. Now, Rashi explains that his logic is that a bed with its canopy is not a permanent structure. No matter how strong and how much roof there is, you're going to move it away. Relative to the schach on top of it, it's not considered a structure. The schach isn't going to stay for much longer. So the Gemara points out that this is very similar to a Mishnah which quotes Rav Yehuda's opinion. And Rav Yehuda says that as follows. He says that in our days we used to sleep under the bed, and we used to do that in front of the Zakanim, and they didn't tell us anything wrong. So you see that sleeping under the bed is not a problem. And the logic is the same. Any type of structure, if it's temporary, if it's going to move around, is not a problem inside a sukkah. And so the Gemara says, if that's what Rabbi Bar Rav Huna is based on, why doesn't he just say that? Allah is like Rav Yehuda. The Gemara says he didn't want to say that, because in sleeping under a bed is different than sleeping under a canopy. A canopy is made to protect the people under it. A bed is made to serve the people on top of it. So a bed is innately less of an oel, it's less of a structure. And because it's not meant to serve as a roof, it's meant to serve as a floor almost, meant to serve as something that you use on top of it, not under it. And therefore, if you would just say halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, you would think that that's the reason, that's the halacha that he means to say. And therefore, he wants to specify, no, any temporary structure inside a more permanent structure is not a problem. Okay, this takes us to the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes to the topic of kosher schach and non-kosher schach. So the Mishnah begins with an example which we've seen in a few Mishnayos earlier. It's been quoted by the Gemara earlier. The Gemara says if you have a pumpkin plant or a grapevine or an ivy and you pull it over your sukkah while it's still growing from the ground, that's pasul schach. Now, there's two ways to make it kosher. One is that it's mixed and intermingled with kosher schach, and it's the minority, so therefore it's bottled to the majority. Or you cut the trunk, you detach it from where it's growing from the ground, and then it is kosher schach, not a problem. The Mishnah then goes on to give me the rule of what's kosher schach and what's not. Kosher schach needs two conditions. It has to be that it's not mekabel tumah, and that it comes from the ground. It grows from the ground. If it doesn't have both of those, if it's either mekabel tumah or it doesn't grow from the ground, it is not kosher schach. Now the Gemara goes into the subject of tasav v'loy mina aseh. The Gemara says, when you're cutting this growing plant, so it's already there, it's already on top of the sukkah, it's already forming schach, but it's pasul schach. Then you cut it, you've just turned it from pasul schach to kosher schach, but you haven't made the sukkah. You've turned a made structure, a built sukkah which is pasul, into a built sukkah which is kosher. Is that called making a sukkah? The Torah said, v'asu lachem, you have to make a sukkah. You didn't make a sukkah. You koshered a pasul sukkah. So that should be a problem of what we call tasav v'loy mina aseh. So the first is a machlokes amaray. Rav Yosef, it's not so clear who said what. Rav Yosef quoted, Rav Yosef said in front of Rav Huna that Rav said that this is a problem. This is tasav v'loy mina aseh, and therefore what you have to do is to destroy the sukkah and rebuild it. That's not so hard. You just have to move the schach around. And moving the schach around, it's like you're taking the sukkah down and making a new sukkah. You're replacing the schach upon the sukkah. You're doing an asir. You're building the sukkah by moving the schach from one place to another. When you put it down, it's like you made a new sukkah. Now, Rav Huna said that this is not Rav said zalach. This is Shmuel, and he said that to Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef turned his face away as if to say, and he said to him, he said, I didn't say it's only Rav. It's Rav and it's Shmuel. And Rav Huna then said, no, Rav doesn't say that. Rav says the other way. Only Shmuel says you have to move this. Rav says it's kosher the way it is. So the Gemara is going to move forward with this assumption from now on. Rav says this is not tasav v'loy mina aseh. If you cut the branch and you make this pasul schach into kosher schach, it's not tasav v'loy mina aseh. And Shmuel says it is tasav v'loy mina aseh. That means according to Shmuel, it's a problem because you built a sukkah and you put the branches on top of it, and then you turned it into kosher sukkah afterwards. Rav says no. By cutting it, you just built a sukkah. That's called building a sukkah, because when you put the branches on it, that was pasul schach, so you didn't build a sukkah. Then you turn that pasul schach into kosher schach. That's as if you put it on right there, and that's called tasav. That's your asiyah. It's not called tasav v'loy mina aseh. It's like you built it right then. What is tasav v'loy mina aseh? That's where you don't build a sukkah. That's where the sukkah is already there, but it's not even a sukkah, and then you make it into a sukkah in a inverse manner. What would that be? That's if you have a pile of hay, you have a haystack, and you dig out a sukkah from under it. So the walls and the schach are already there. All you did was dig out the space under it. That's tasav v'loy mina aseh. You didn't make the sukkah. You negatively, inversely left a situation which was already there become a sukkah by removing something. That's tasav v'loy mina aseh. Now I think we're going to have a few kashas on this. And the Gemara's first kasha is from tzitzis. Now, tzitzis could also have a concept of tasav v'loy mina aseh, because the Torah says you should put the tzitzis strings on the cloth. That is the asiyah, that is making the tzitzis strings. Now, the Gemara discusses two ways you could do that would sound like tasav v'loy mina aseh. That's very similar to cutting the branch. And that is if you take one long string, fold it into 8, tie it onto the tzitzis, and then you snip the ends so that it forms 8 separate strings. That's one tasav v'leiman asay. Another tasav v'leiman asay possibility, again it would go into this machokas, is if you have strings that you put on 2 corners. You loop them around and around 8 times through 2 corners. You tie them, and then you cut them in the middle. And when you cut them in the middle, you've now split it into 2 separate things. So the Gemara first says that we know that Rav does not hold the tasav v'leiman asay is a problem. Again, this is Rav Huna trying to prove that Rav holds the tasav v'leiman asay is not a problem because we view the cutting of the branches if you made it, because Rav allowed this type of tzitzis making to happen. That means obviously he says when you cut the strings, that's like you put them on. That's considered like you put them on right there, and it's not a problem. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. Shmuel says a very similar thing. Shmuel says Rav said the type where you strung them one long string and then snipped it into 8. Shmuel says where you put it on 2 corners in one long loop and then you snip them into 2 separate corners after that. So the Gemara says the way Shmuel expresses it is a brisa, where Shmuel is quoting a brisa of Rav Chia. It says if you put it on in that manner and then you cut the strings, it's kosher. So the Gemara says that sounds like therefore your tasav v'leiman asay is not a problem. The Gemara says no. There it's talking about where you looped the strings around, then you cut it, then you tied the knots. The tying of the knots is making it, and the tying of the knots happened afterwards. So then what's a chiddush? That's not halacha you need to tell me. If you tie it on afterwards, so then it's like you took 8 strings and you tied it on in the normal way. You tied one on one corner and one on the other corner. What do I care that first you looped it through 2 corners and then cut it in half? So the says, no, he's coming to tell you a different chiddush. You may have thought that's a problem halachically for a different reason, nothing to do with tasav v'leiman asay. Maybe thought that's a problem because the Torah says a kanaf psil, that you should have 1 psil on 1 kanaf. You should not have 1 psil on 2 kanafayim. You should not have 1 string serving 2 corners at once and then being separated. That would be an issue. Okay. Now the Gemara has a couple of kashas. First of all, we have a brisa that says if you put strings on in this matter and you did not cut the heads, it is puzzle. Gemara says it's puzzle. What does it mean it's puzzle? It means that it's puzzle even if you cut the heads. That's what it means to say. It means to say that it's puzzle forever. So it's a kasha on Rav, because Rav should say that you're allowed to cut the heads afterwards. There's not a problem with tasav v'leiman asay. Gemara says no. Tasav, it's not. It doesn't mean it's puzzle forever. It means it's puzzle until you actually cut them. Once you cut them, it's good. You don't have to take them off and put them back on. It's not tasav v'leiman asay. Now Shmuel would learn this in saying that it's puzzle forever. You have to take them off. Levi learns it that way as well. Rav Masna learns it that way as well. Some say that Rav Masna said that this incident actually happened. I made tzitzis this way, and I came in front of Shmuel, and he told me it's puzzle forever. You have to take the strings off and put them back on if you want to be able to use it. Cutting the ends would not make it kosher at all. Okay, now the Gemara is kasher from another brisa. This brisa says if you tie them on and then you cut the heads of the strings, it is puzzle, and that's just like a sukkah. Again, this is clear here. It says if you hung them on the strings and then cut the heads, it's still puzzle. So here you can't answer that it's puzzle until you cut the strings, because it's clearly you cut the strings and then it's puzzle. And the Brisa continues, says it's just like a sukkah, where you put the vine or the ivy or the pumpkin plant on it and then you cut the branch. That's all the same problem of tasav v'leiman asay. Very clearly both cases against both the halachas we said in the name of Rav. So the Gemara said, well, the case of the branch is not a problem, because it could be here that what's talking about is where you didn't cut the branch with a tool, you ripped it with your hand, and therefore it stays pretty much attached, and it looks like it's attached. Even though it's detached, the problem is that it looks no good. But as far as the kasha, from the fact that it tzitzis, it says clearly that if you cut it, it's still a problem, that the Gemara doesn't have an answer to. The Gemara says it's a kasha, it's a kasha. The Gemara doesn't call it tiyufta. The Gemara doesn't say it's completely rejected. The Gemara says it is a kasha. Now the Gemara compares this to another halacha, and the Gemara wants to say that in that case, it may be a machokas tanaim about this very subject. What's the case there? It's talking about a hadas. Hadas is one of the 4 minim which we take. It's one of the 3 that's tied together with the lulav. Now the hadas is puzzle if the fruit, the berries on the hadas branch are more than the branch itself. The leaves of the branch itself. And if it's too many of the berries, it's puzzle. So Gemara says, well, you could take the berries off and it'll be kosher then afterwards. The question is, what if you already tied the hadas in a bunch? You tied it together with the lulav and the arava, and then you want to take the berries off. So the Gemara says, so that's a machlekes tanaim. Machlekes tanaim if that works or not if you take them off after you tied them together. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Yitzadik, it's possible. On the Chachamim, it's kosher. So the Gemara wants to say that the machlokes is as follows. Everybody holds that it's a mitzvah to tie them together. And if you don't tie them together, it's not ready for the mitzvah. Tying them together would be like building a sukkah. It's possible until you tie them together. You have to make a tying. And everybody also holds that the halacha about tying love is the same as the halacha of building the sukkah. They're linked together. We have a hekesh between the two, and the same halacha of taser v'leim and aser that applies by sukkah applies by the hatas leaves. What's the machlekes? Machlekes is what is called taser v'leim and aser. Taking off berries, is that called taser v'leim and aser because you already did the tying together and now you're making the hatas kosher? Or do we say no? It's just like cutting off the branch of the sukkah and it's just like cutting off the branch that's growing and forming schach, turning it from pasul to kosher is called making the sukkah, and here also it's called making the hadas. It's called making the tying, and it's not a problem. So that would seem to be this exact machlokes. The Gemara says no, it's not the machlokes. Really, it could be that everybody agrees that there is a problem of tasei v'loy minha asei. This is not kosher. The question is, do we learn from sukkah or not? One man says we learn from sukkah, and therefore you have the same problem here by hadas. And the one who says that it's kosher is, you don't learn from sukkah. It's only halacha by hadas. It's not halacha of sukkah here. And the Gemara says maybe the machlokes is not really based on that. Machlokes is is there such a mitzvah as tying it together with the lulav and the arava? Is that part of the mitzvah or not? Do you have to have the tying be done? Is that part of making into a kosher sukkah or into a kosher 3 minim or not? And the Gemara points out that itself is a machlokes tanaim. As we have a machlokes tanaim, whether you have to do the igud, the tying together, or not. According to Rav Yehuda, you have to have it. It's possible if you don't. According to the Chachamim, you do not. Now the Gemara gets into this machlokes a little bit. The Gemara says, what's the reason behind this machlokes? Rav Yehuda says you have a drasha, a gzeres shava using the word lekicha. The word lekicha appears by lulav and the 4 minim, and it also appears by the bundle of plants that you're going to take to sprinkle the paraduma water. And just like there we know that it has to be tied together, here also has to be tied together. That's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. And the Chachamim say, no, there is no such gzeres shava. You're not going to make up your own gzeres shava. We don't have a tradition that such a gzeres shava exists, and it's not a problem. Now the Gemara says, who is the opinion? We have a different brisa. Who's the opinion that says that there's a mitzvah to tie them together? If it's Rabbi Yehuda, it's an obligation. And if it's a Rabbanan, well, who says there's a mitzvah? So the Gemara says it's the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan agree that there is a mitzvah. And the mitzvah has nothing to do with tying. The mitzvah is zekei v'anveyu. You want to make the mitzvah beautiful. And the way to make the mitzvah beautiful is by tying them together. Okay, the Gemara now goes into the topic of what is kosher for schach, what is not. And just like we had said, there's 2 conditions. It has to grow from the ground, and it has to be something that is not mekabel tumah. It says, how do you know that? First, you learn it out of the anani hakavid. The anani hakavid were clouds. Cloud is water vapor. Water vapor comes from the ground, and water vapor is not mekabel tumah. The Gemara says, how do you know water vapor comes from the ground? The Gemara says, because we look in Ma'aseh Bereshis, it says, "Ve'ed yalav in haaretz." Steam, vapor comes up from the ground, and it forms rain, and it falls on the ground. So you see that steam, clouds, water vapor is all something that comes from the ground. It doesn't grow from the ground, but it comes from the ground, and therefore we learn from there, just like the anani hakaved is what specifically the anani hakaved is what the sukkahs are meant to evoke. The Torah said that the sukkahs are to remind us of the anani hakaved that we sat in when we left Mitzrayim. So therefore it should be just like the anani hakaved. It should come from the ground, and it should be not makabel tamah. So the Gemara says that's good according to the Man Yamar, that when the Torah says that you should sit in sukkahs because you sat in sukkahs when you left Mitzrayim, is referring to the Anani HaKavod. And that is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer the Tana. However, Rabbi Kiva disagrees. Rabbi Kiva says no, those were real sukkahs. It had nothing to do with Anani HaKavod. So how then do we know that schach has to be something which is growing from the ground and is not makabel tumah? So the Gemara says you learn from the Korban Chagiga. The Torah says Chag HaSukkos Taselecha. It connects the Chag and the Sukkos. Chag refers to Korban Chagiga. Sukkah refers to the actual Sukkah itself, which means the schach of the Sukkah. And the Korban Chagiga is an animal. An animal comes from the ground, Rabbi Yochanan holds, and coming from the ground is because it is fed. It gets its life support from the ground, as opposed to fish that get it from the sea and birds that get it from the air. And of course, a live animal is not mekabel tumah. So Gemara says this can't be the source, because if this was the source, then it would also have to be something that was alive. It would have to be from a living creature, not a plant. It would have to be from something from the animal kingdom. It's a very key feature of the carbon chagiga. So the Gemara accepts that and moves on to another source, which we shall see on Daf Yud Veis.